This external drum triggering system has three components. First is the trigger, either a switch or a piezo element. And that trigger gets sent to a converter which converts that trigger signal into a MIDI message. That MIDI message in turn is forwarded to a sound generator that can use that MIDI message to create audio. The first element that I used was a snap action or micro switch. I got mine from All Electronics, but you can use any good switch that doesn't have a great deal of electrical bounce. I took that and connected it to the input of the DDRUM trigger interface that converts the trigger switch input to MIDI message. I took the MIDI out of that and sent it to the MIDI in of our Mach series keyboard. Now let's look at each element and see what we have to do to get it and the whole system working. Let's look at the first element, the trigger. Now I have three individual trigger switch pedals and I have one double trigger switch pedal. You could make a double, you could make a single, they'll all work fine. Let's take a look to see what's inside one of these. We have the back here, and all we really have is a single snap action switch with two wires going to a 1/4 inch jack. So I'm using the normally open contacts of this snap action switch. I've attached the snap action switch to a piece of wood, and that piece of wood is screwed to this foot pedal, and the trigger arm extends through a 1-inch hole and is above the surface, and that's so that when I hit, it makes that contact. You can hear it. Now this is just a simple foot switch enclosure, made it a 5-degree angle. I found that works really well under my keyboard. Okay, let's start setting up element 2, the trigger I/O. First we're going to use MIDI cables. I'm going to take one end and I'm going to hook it up to MIDI in. I'm going to take the other end and I'm going to hook it up to the I/O, specifically the MIDI out. So that is now in the MIDI out. On the back are a series of trigger inputs. I'm going to use triggers 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. I'm not going to use 4 because I found that 4 didn't allow me to change the trigger type to a switch. I'm just going to take the outputs from my pedals and apply them here. So I've hooked these up, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, and now it's time to power up the trigger I/O. Now I'm going to trigger this while holding down the two switches to the right here, the value switches, and that's going to do a factory reset. I have these two down, and I'm powering it up, and you notice it says reset. So we're going to go to kit 0, and we're going to start to see if we get anything. I'm going to press the first. There we go. Sounds kind of weak. The reason it does is because we have to change the trigger type. This is PP, so we're going to change this to SS, which is switch, and you notice it's fine. So next, we'll do the second one. Change that also to SS. Third one, also to SS. Fourth pedal, change that to SS. And fifth pedal, change that also to SS. Now, the only way I was able to do that was by changing in the utility mode the basic receive and send channels to 10, because when you reset the I/O, it automatically resets the trigger MIDI channel to 10. And remember, each pedal has to have its trigger MIDI channel set to the same as your keyboard. I'll go back up to the kit, and that stores it. And now my kit 0 allows me to send the appropriate MIDI messages to the keyboard. Here's a 61 key keyboard. What I'd like to do is access the octave below so that I can program the drums there, and then when I play the normal 61 keys, I won't have interference from those drum sounds. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit the octave key one octave lower so that I can access that one octave, program it, and then go back to the normal octaves and then play the normal keyboard. First, we're going to select the drum set that we'd like to use. So I'm going to go to Category Search and go back to Drum Percussion, and I'm going to select the Dry Standard Kit. Okay, next I'm going to go down one octave, and that gives me the kick drum here instead of down here. I'd like to move whatever I'm going to use from this octave down to this octave. So I'm going to do that by first pressing the Edit key and number 1. And you notice when I press the key it now says C1. When I press the octave key down it says C0. So I'm going to go through. Back at C1, notice that the wave number is 2487. So I'm going to press C0 and change this to 2487, and it's starting to sound more like a kick drum. Next, I'll go back to C1 and check the output and see what I have on the output here. So I'm going to change that through 20 and 12. Go back to C0, change it to through, and this to through, which I've already done. Now we're going to go to pitch, and notice in C1 the coarse and fine are 0, so I'm going to change those to 0 as well. Okay, now check velocity sensitive, there's no difference there. Go to filter, there's no difference there. Now I'm going to go to amp. Notice C1 has a 125, center, center, and 0. So I'm going to change C0 to 125. Okay, that's better. Check velocity sensitive. That's the same. AEG is completely different. 0, 38, 127, 105. So let's change that. 0, 38, 127. Okay, that sounds pretty good. So what I've done is I've taken the kick that is here and I've changed the parameters so that it's now here as well. And I'm going to do that for everything I want to use, bringing it down here. Now I've taken the drum sounds from this octave down to this, and I haven't put them in the same place. Of course, you don't have to. You can put them any way you want. And I've also shortened up the decay times on the tom-toms because I think they were lasting too long, so these sound a little better to me. Now what I have to do is store this. So I'm going to press store, and it says, where do you want to store it? Now I can change this. I'm going to put it all the way at the top, and I've already done this once before, so I also changed the name to foot drum. So I'm just going to press enter, and it says, are you sure? And I say enter, yes. It's going to execute. So now that we have it programmed on the keyboard, we have to adjust the I/O so that the right MIDI messages get sent here. But before I do that, I want to do one thing. I want to take this off of octave. Okay, let's start by going into Utility and pressing MIDI, and notice that the receive channel is 1. So we have to make that 10 because it has to be the same as our I/O. Okay, we're going to store that. So now we're going to exit, and we're going to go to DDRUM 32, which is now our stored foot drum. Okay, now we're ready to program. So let's go down to the trigger MIDI number. Notice it's 38. That's D3. Let's press this. That brings us to B2. I want to go down even further to C2. Oh, and we also have to, of course, change that to PP. It has to be changed to SS. There we go. So let's try the next one, which I want to be the snare. Let's change that to SS. Right now it's not a snare. So I want to bring this down to D2. There we go. And that's our snare. The next one I want to be the cymbal. So that should be C#2. That's C#2. Let's change the trigger to SS, and there we got C#2. Now these two are going to be our tom-toms. E2, and I'm going to make, okay, so that's E2. Then I'm going to make this one F2. F2, and I also have to change the trigger to SS. So now I have okay, so I have kick, snare, cymbal, and toms. They're all set. I'm going to move this selection up to kit, and that stores it as 0. Now I want to create a performance where I have the foot drum accessible in the octave down here, not on the keyboard that I'm going to play, and then whatever I want to play up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the foot drum kit, and then I'm going to layer it with a full grand piano. So when I press that, it's now a new performance. But when I play the keyboard, I have both the drums and the piano together. So what I want to do is separate those two. So what I'm going to do is, actually, I edit, and then I'm going to press 1. And you notice I have this screen which allows me to edit this performance. I have UDrum 1 here and pre 101 here, which is actually the keyboard. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to change that. I'm going to turn part 4 to on and make that UDrum 32, because usually the drum is the last item in a performance. I'm going to make this the keyboard, and for now I'm going to turn these other two off. So I have the keyboard on as the first part and the drum as the fourth part. So we'll take a look at the output. The drum is a little low. I'm going to make the drum a little lower because it might be too loud. Okay, go back to voice. So now let's go to the limits. What I'm going to do now is go to the drum piece, which is number 4, and I'm going to limit it to B0. So that's going to limit it. You notice you can't hear the drum anymore, but when I press on the foot pedals, you can hear it, but you can also hear the keyboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to limit the keyboard to start at C1. C1. So when I hit the foot pedal, I just get the drum, and when I play the keyboard, I just get the keyboard. Now what I'm going to do is store this. So I'm going to put it in user 2. I'm stored it right here, user 2 127 And I'm going to enter and press enter again. So that's a new performance. And I can play with my foot the drums. Since the I/O can work with simple switches, it stands to reason it could work with an electronic drum kit. Now I have an old electronic drum kit here that has a controller, but the controller really doesn't sound very good. So what I've done is I've taken all the connections, taken them off, and instead I've connected each one of the elements here to the I/O. I selected the power standard kit